Welcome back, whisky fans. It's Ben Nevis's turn this time, although it kind of was last time as well. This is Ben Nevis 10-year-old. It's not particularly easy to get hold of sometimes, at least here in the UK. Sometimes it is, but I've also seen it go in and out of stock, sometimes for long periods. So if you do see this one and you're curious to try it and you see it for a good price, give it a go. So Ben Nevis 10, as I mentioned in my review of Nikka from the barrel, which I think is a superb whisky, this stuff is owned by Nikka, and I think that you can really see that in the presentation. Same size bottle, same roughly kind of same colour scheme, same similar fonts, similar feel. And I think that with both of these, the bottles are a little bit worrying when you first pick them up, because they're not as bad as the old Balblair bottle launcher boxes. You remember those ones that Balblair used to do where they open on two sides, so you pick it up and, yeah, asking for trouble. And this one, it kind of looks like it's going to be a bit of a puzzle to open, but it's actually not. That's all it is. It just comes straight off the top, and your bottle inside is slightly dark brown glass. I think that probably looks darker to you on screen there than it does to me in person. I can easily see the fill level and even guesstimate at the colour of that one from the outside, but it has got a little bit of protection from sunlight there. But if I compare this one and its styling to my Yoichi, you'll see that there is definitely a theme there. You can kind of tell that they're coming from the same company. I don't know how much Yoichi have changed their presentation these days, because this one here is probably over 10 years old, because I do not buy Japanese whiskey anymore, with a few exceptions, because I think that the price that we have to pay now here in the UK is taking the piss, and it's not even like it's anywhere near as good as it used to be. I'm really hoping that that's going to change soon, and the Japanese distilleries are going to rebuild their stocks and build that quality up to where it was. My feeling is that, along with Scotch whisky, it's going to be a long time coming, if ever. Because while they've got the sales there, they're never going to go back to that situation where they're dumping very old quality stock into cheap bottlings. They're just not going to do it when they've got money to be made elsewhere. But I think this is my last remaining Yoichi, actually. I might have a 12, 15's gone. I never actually bought one of the 8, not a whole bottle of the 18. So you can see that the glass in particular and the labels, you can see that they're coming from a similar place, can't you? Obviously though, one's got Japanese writing on it and the other is in English, to let you know that one is made in Japan and one's made in Scotland. Or are they? One thing that does disappoint me about this Ben Nevis, I haven't had a problem with it, but it is a cork stopper. It's quite a nice cork stopper and it hasn't snapped on me like a hell of a lot of them have lately. But I was really hoping that, along with a similar kind of bottle and aesthetic, they might have used one of these fantastic screw tops that the Japanese distilleries have been using for a long time on their own products. But the plastic screw tops that you get on the majority of Japanese whiskey now are really well designed and really well made, really effective closures that don't snap or spoil the whiskey, as far as we know. So a little bit disappointed that they didn't go down that route with the Ben Nevis as well. But I think that it really just shows how prevalent and stubborn the fear of progress and innovation away from perceived tradition is in the Scotch whisky industry, even though it's a Scotch which is owned by a Japanese company. Ben Nevis though. Ben Nevis Distillery was founded in 1825 at Fort William, which I believe is probably classed as West Highlands. And the distillery is actually situated kind of in the foothills of Ben Nevis Mountain itself. Very, very dramatic and beautiful part of the UK if you're considering visiting. And Ben Nevis Distillery produces single malt and previously grain whisky as well. I think they were one of the first Scottish distilleries to do both. Ben Nevis also used to have their own floor maltings. Sadly, these are now closed and they buy all of their malt in. I've heard rumours, sort of unconfirmed rumours, that they buy some of their peated malt in from Port Ellen on the Isle of Islay. Although that may have changed now that Diageo are kind of cutting off some of the distilleries that aren't in their own portfolio. Some Ben Nevis is peated, some Ben Nevis is not. I would describe this one as fairly stereotypical, lightly peated. But I myself haven't really had anything from Ben Nevis which I would describe as heavily peated. Details from the label and the box on this one. We have got an age statement. We know that everything in here is at least 10 years old. It's 46%, so that's the gold standard for ABV for carrying flavour and aroma. We're told on the label and guaranteed on the label that not just some bottles, but this bottle from this batch is natural colour and non-chill filtered. So really, 10 out of 10, everything that matters, they've done it. And it's kind of sad that I literally can't remember the last time I reviewed a whiskey where it had that full bingo sheet of specifications. All I can say is that it's nice that somebody still cares about the whiskey that they make. Kind of similar to the Nikka from the barrel, this one, even though it is very well spec'd, as we've just said, it is still relatively expensive for a 10-year-old whiskey at about £50 to £55, but not all age statements are created equally. Let's see what we actually get for our money. We're in the label. Never mind. Wabi sabi. One day I'll stop taking the piss out of them for their Japanese Scotch whiskey, but I'm not done yet. Definitely a much more natural looking colour than we had on the Nikka from the barrel, so we know this is natural. Although, as I said before, I think I said that I don't sense much sherry on this one. If there is any sherry in this, it's definitely heavily refill or a very, very small portion of what goes into this. That looks to me like what you would expect from a 10-year-old bourbon matured whiskey, perhaps bourbon and refill. Good natural colour. Ben Nevis 10-year-old on the nose. Young, youthful, bright, supple, fresh, but also quite fruity and malty, and while matured, it is a whiskey of character. I'm getting lots and lots of red apple on the nose. Apple pie with like a apple sauce and baking spices and custard. There is a creamy lactic fermentary note to this whiskey. Reminds me a little bit of you can't get it anymore, but like the 10-year-old vintages of bourbon matured Balblair. A little bit of a green olive note with a hint of lemon on the nose. It has a proper backbone to it. It's slightly salty and mineral. Seashores, creamy fermentary notes, a little bit of a sea foam note, and a little bit of a yeastiness. I think that it is really, and this is something that interests me, it's something that I enjoy, it's a whiskey of contrasts and contradictions. With that fruity sweetness and that dry minerality. Many, many different sides, different facets, constantly changing and battling each other in excellent balance. It is, especially as it opens up, it is a very fruity whiskey. It's got a wonderful malty presence to it, with even perhaps a little bit of a crossover into some of the tamer, more sugary, fruity white rums, which I can only really put down to the fact that the cask influence on this one is fairly minor, and it just has that really bold quality fermentation going on. Very sugary. Icing sugar, maltiness, barley sugar, dry oak. Surely there must be a majority of, I would say, refill bourbon casks. Probably a lot of second fill bourbon going into this, I think. Possibly a little bit of first fill. But it seems to me like a lightly peated second fill bourbon maturation. Subtle. And again, like the Nikka, it's got that really lovely, subtle, faint, creamy, toffeed smokiness to it. Just that delicate, light peatiness. And I think that light, creamy, peaty, slightly farmy smokiness mixed with that toffeed maltiness and slight toffee caramel note coming through from the bourbon cask reminds me quite a bit of like a really good lightly peated Highland Park. Like if you get a lightly peated, independently bottled Highland Park, I think that the peat on this one is fairly comparable. And that dry minerality, slightly, a little bit of a wet gravel and flintiness. It is peated. It is definitely peated if you look for it, but very lightly so. And in my humble opinion, very, very well made and very pleasantly peated. Let's see how it tastes. Lovely, grippy, forceful, flavourful, well-made, robust and hearty whiskey. Hearty red apple and apple peel, dried apple chips, malty through and through, strong, robust, meaty maltiness. Really good mouthfeel and texture, really lovely, waxy and full profile in a way that 10-year-old whiskey almost never is, but also with a dry and slightly bitter, aggressive focus. Creamy, fermentary, thick. Again with that slightly salty, chalky and mineral note. There is a faint, creamy peat smoke like lightly peated Aromatic on the palate of this one. In general, much more intense on the palate than what you're getting from the nose. But all in all, a wonderful whiskey of contrasts, a wonderfully featured and interesting experience. Gonna have one more sip and look at the finish. Long finish, long and lingering, helped by that light peatiness. Strong malt, really malty, quite salty on the finish, but always with that lingering, creamy, farmy smokiness. I think that this Ben Nevis 10, it tastes its age, but I think that it has certain notes that could easily be mistaken for a few years older than 10, with that wonderfully robust, oily maltiness, while still remaining fresh and free from unnecessarily heavy cask influence from what I assume are those refill bourbon casks, which really is quite an achievement. It's a wonderfully balanced whiskey that really ticks a lot of boxes for me. I think that it's a very well made, distillate driven and fully flavoured 10-year-old malt whiskey. The kind of rich depth that a lot of people talk about with worm tubs. And as far as I know, I don't think they actually use worm tubs at Ben Nevis, which kind of reinforces my suspicion that we really give too much credit to worm tubs. But I think that this one, it really has that full, meaty, oily richness that you associate with distilleries like Craigellachie and Mortlach and the new Ardnahoe. I think that this is going to be a great whiskey for people who like the fruity, appley Speyside whiskies like Glenfiddich and Craigellachie, but who also appreciate a little bit of dirt and challenging character in their malt. I think that it's also a really good one for people who have enjoyed Nikka from the barrel, as well as Isle of Arran, Lochranza, Highland Park, because it has that fruity, lightly peated profile. Although I'd actually say that the peat in this one is probably even lighter than what you get in a good IB Highland Park. Probably a good one for people that like Balblair as well, whether that's the old 10-year-old bourbon matured vintage or the modern 12, because it has that wonderful, hearty barley and fermentary profile. I think this might also be one that appeals to people that like peated Benromach as well, like the young, heavily peated Benromachs. Not to say that this is heavily peated, but I think that like Benromach peat smoke and the triple distilled heavily peated aromatic. This really does well to combine that really skillfully done peatiness with that slightly more greasy, oily, dirty and mineral side. I think this is not a whiskey for everyone. It's probably not a beginner's malt. I think it's probably a little bit challenging for people who are really taking their first steps. And it probably has more nuance than beginners are really going to be able to appreciate fully. I think that it is that little bit challenging because it has that sharp and spirit-led profile with that just slightly uncompromising style. I think that this one, considering that it is just 46%, it doesn't mess around on the flavours. It shows excellent maltiness and good age, but fresh youthfulness at the same time, which is a combination that I really like in a young, reasonably affordable whiskey. I think that an interesting comparison that kind of has to be done is this compared to the Nikka from the barrel, which allegedly contains some Ben Nevis in the recipe. Nikka from the barrel might actually be a little bit more approachable than this and probably the more friendly option. I think that for once, talking about the Nikka from the barrel, we actually have, for once, a blend which smooths and rounds the end result as they're supposed to, rather than just cutting costs with rock gut grain whiskey. I think that Nikka from the barrel is more toffied and rounded, definitely more sherried than this, which the Ben Nevis 10 seems to lack entirely in my opinion. I'm not really getting any sherry influence on this one. I think that the Ben Nevis 10 is sharper and has a little bit more peat, or perhaps it just shines through a little bit more with the lack of sherry. When I first tried these two together, the Ben Nevis and the Nikka from the barrel, I was surprised at just how many similarities there are. They really are similar whiskies, and I think after spending some time with these two, without a doubt, there is some of this stuff in the Nikka from the barrel, and that's fine with me. My only problem is that I'd really like a proper statement kind of putting this to bed and tidying up the loose ends with this and just telling us what they're selling us. I don't have a problem with this one being sold at £50 and containing some Scotch whisky from their sister distillery, if that's what they want to do in a £50 premium blend, so be it, but just tell us. But once I got over the similarities between these two, another thing that really surprised me after that was that I actually probably prefer the Nikka from the barrel. And I love both of these. I'd buy them both again at full price if I have to, which probably isn't the case with this one because you can get it on offer. But I do find myself preferring this one a little bit. And I'm not saying that you should buy this one and not the other one. I think you should buy both because I think they're both great. But this is the one that I kind of find myself reaching for more often. And I know what you're thinking. A bunch of you are thinking that's because it's high strength. And it's true, I do love my high strength whiskies for that extra intensity of flavour, but that's not it. That's not why I prefer this one. I think it is actually the sherry in this one. I think that it works really well and it adds an extra dimension, and it's worth losing a little bit of the peat that you get on the Ben Nevis to get the wonderful balance that you get on this one. And possibly that I think that the Nikka from the barrel, as I mentioned before at the end of the review for this, I think that it probably has a little bit more, a small quantity, but a little bit more of old stock gone into this to top dress it. Saying that, they are both great whiskies. And I think that unless anything that I've mentioned in either of these reviews is a red flag, you probably should seriously buy both of these. They're both worth buying at least once, especially if you haven't tried either of them. But for me, I really can't get over this little humble cuboid from Nikka. It is truly one of those rare blends that justifies the category. And that's enough about the Nikka. Stop stealing the show. They're both great, and they both deserve at least to be tried. You should really experience both of these. And the Yoichi as well, but don't get the modern stuff until you start hearing that it's improved. Try a sample, try a bar pour. Don't pay the prices that they're charging for Yoichi and Yamazaki and Hakushu anymore because it's too much. Sadly. But let me know what you think about the Ben Nevis. Do you think that I should try and get some of the older versions of this? Because I think there are some. As I said at the start, I think that they are kind of few and far between. It seems like the availability is not great. And some people have suggested that's because a lot of Ben Nevis is going into this now. And some people have said that that's why Ben Nevis 10 is more like a 10-year-old these days than it used to be. Which is sad if it's true. I don't actually have that much experience with Ben Nevis over the last 10, 20 years to be able to make a judgment on that. But let me know what you think about this one, whether you think it's changed, and what you think of the other bottlings that you can get from Ben Nevis. Thanks for watching. I've really enjoyed these ones. I hope you have too. See you next time, and cheers.